Okay, so let's talk about variables and loops. So this will be a little bit of introduction to loops. We'll probably have to talk about loops in detail later in a separate video, but as an introduction, this should do. So let's go ahead and open our script editor. So tools, script editor, as you know. So back to this. So I've cleaned this up a little bit. So we're back to basics. So the only thing that's done so far is that we've assigned our app application to our variable app. That's pretty much all we did so far. So if you're not sure what this means, please go ahead and watch the first video and then come back to this. Okay, so we have our app variables. So first of all, now I'm gonna access the current active sheet, which is the sheet 1 right now. So to get to our sheet in our app, we'll have to get the current active spreadsheet inside of our app. And instead of our spreadsheet, we can get our current active sheet. So I did this in the other video in 2 separate steps, but in this video I'll just do in 1 step. So in 1 line I can just get what I need, and that's going to be my active sheet equals this. So by the way, this is a variable. So when you do a variable in JavaScript, and really pretty much any probably other language, you cannot use spaces in your variables. So I can't have like this variable active sheet. It has to be one word variable. Also, you should not use negative signs in your variables or positive signs in your variables. You could use underscores. That's fine. So I'm not sure if JavaScript allows you to start with a number as a variable name. No, it doesn't. So it has to start with an alpha letter. Apparently, you can though use a number after that. So usually the common method, I guess, for a variable is to capitalize. I guess this is what they call camel case, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, the first word is in lowercase, and every other word is capitalized, so you can kind of see the separation in them. You don't have to do this, but I guess if you're gonna be writing code, you may want to follow some uh, concepts. Now, also, you may want to have some comments in your code to understand what it's all about. And if you're writing like a couple of lines, maybe there's no need to comment, but it's a good practice to comment lines of code to explain what they actually do. So, for example, to explain what this line does, I could get a comment, and the way you do comments in JavaScript, you do this two slashes, I guess, side by side, and then you type whatever you need. So I'm gonna say get current active sheet. And this is another thing, like if you name your variables in a way that it makes sense, then it's going to be easier to understand what's going on. And maybe you'll need less commenting if you appropriately name your variables. So anyways, that's going to get our active sheet. Now in our active sheet, we're going to get the range. And the actual line I want to get is this. See how it says 1. So I want to get this 1. So that's going to be in the 8th row and the first column. So I'm going to get 8 and 1. And I'm going to get the value from that cell. And what I want to do, I want to take that value and I want to assign it to a variable. So I'm going to go variable, what am I going to call it? Some cell, I guess, equals this. So I'm going to get what's the value in that cell, which is, if you look at it, what is this? It's 1. And I'm going to assign it to a variable, some cell. Now what I want to do, it's 1 here. What I want to do, I want to take whatever the number is in the cell and increment it by some number. So let's say I want to add 5 to this 1 and get 6 as a result, right? So for that reason, if we have some cell as a variable, the first line of code is going to access that variable that's currently in there, which is 1, and is going to make this sum cell equal to 1. So that's the variable we're going to have. And sometimes if you want to make sure what it is, you can always use our logger log. So our logger object with a log method in it, and you can just log that variable to see what does Google Sheet script see in that variable at that particular point. So if you wanted to know what it sees in this variable, in this sum cell right at this line, you could just do logger log that and simply just run your script. And I'm gonna run it this way because I'm zoomed in and I can't see half of this stuff, but you should also have the button here, that's the run button. So anyways, as I run it, I can go to my logs and see what I get. See, the number I get is actually decimal point number. You can see it doesn't say just 1 as we had in our sheets. It says 1.0. But you know, that's as good as 1. So what our variable is now holding is that number 1. Now what I want to do, I want to go to that same cell that I'm in and set the value to something that's a little higher. So I'm going to go to that same cell, and the way you set the value, if you remember, instead of get value, you just set the value, and in parentheses we have to say what that value is going to be. So if I just say sum cell, we'll basically just grab that 1 and put 1 back to the same cell, which shouldn't really make any changes as a result of the execution of this. It should really look the same, right? So what I want to do, I want to grab the value, which is sum cell, and then add like 5 to it, and as a result there should be 6. So that's our math operation we're doing here. So I'm gonna go ahead and save and run the script. Now let's go back and take a look. Now see, the cell became 6 because we took the value that was in it, we added 5, and we put it back to the same cell as we have it. So what's a variable? Variable is a way for you to store information in the variable. It allows you to store information and then later on use that information. So at this point, see, we have this sum cell, we store this variable, and then later on we use it. We use that variable. So and it could be handy for tons of different reasons. And a lot of times when you have to use the variable for the first time, you have to declare the variable. That's why we use this var in front of our first instance of the variable we use. And then later on, if you pay attention, I don't really use that var anymore. I don't have to use it any other time. So to explain you what I mean, I guess, by that, I could also, instead of using this, I'm going to do something a little different. So, and that's another thing about and understanding about the variables is that when you use variables, so I'm going to say sum cell, and I'm going to say on this line, right before the printing out, I'm going to say sum cell equals sum cell plus 5. Okay. So now I don't have to use var keyword anymore because I declared that variable before. Now if you, and I'm going to remove this plus 5 here, and I'm just going to print sum cell. Now if you look at this for the first time, it may kind of look weird if you're not a programmer. If you are, you know exactly what I'm talking about at this point. So the main thing you have to remember is that the equal sign in programming that you use in your lines, it's an assignment operator. And what that means, you shouldn't really think about this as a math formula. So you shouldn't treat this as this. So in math, what this would mean is that 1 equals 1 plus 5, right? And it would basically become 1 equals to 6 if we were looking at this as a math formula. But it's not. So what it is an assignment. And what assignment means is, that means let's do what's on this right side, and whatever the result is, let's assign that to this variable that's on the left side. So that's our assignment. So what I'm saying in this particular case, right in this line, some cell variable equals to 1. Now I go to this line and first we do what's on the right side. And what's on the right side is that 1 plus 5. So that results in 6. And we're saying let's make some cell 6 at this point. So now it's going to become 6 right here in this line. And then because it's 6 on the next line, we're just going to use that 6. Right? So let's actually, instead of 6, because I think there's already, oh, it's actually 6 here. So it's going to be 6 in the beginning. It's not 1 anymore. So what's going to be here, it's going to be 6, then 6 plus 5. So that's 11. So we're going to print 11 as a result of this. So let's go ahead and run this and verify that's actually accurate. So I'm going to go back. See, it became 11 as a result of that. So again, I guess as we do more with variables, you kind of understand better, hopefully, how you use variables and why you should use them. But again, the main thing you want to remember is for the first instance of your variable, you want to declare it using this var keyword. And for any other instance, you don't really have to use var anymore to declare the variable. Okay, so that's that. Now the next thing I want to do here, and again, so for example, if I don't want to delete these lines but I don't want to execute those lines, I can use this to make it a comment, and now we have some comments on top there. So what I want to do right now is show you how to create a simple for loop. And what a loop is good for is to kind of repeat something over and over again. So if you want to repeat something several times, you can use a loop for that. And the syntax for a for loop in JavaScript is going to be like this. So I'm gonna go and type this, and then I'll explain you what this means. I plus plus. So that should do. So that's our curly bracket over here. So that's our what we call our for loop. And what does this for loop do? So to initiate a for loop, you know, this is your syntax of a for loop. And the first thing is in a loop, you can have a variable that's going to change in that loop. And this is, in this particular case, the variable that I have is going to be I. You could write anything instead of this I. So I could do like variable X here, and this would be an X, and this would be an X. And what that means is that we take a variable, we declare a variable I, and initially it's going to be 0. That's what it's going to be. Now, in this particular line, it's the test to see whether the loop should continue looping or not, and running again. So the initial one is 0, and we're going to test, is that smaller than 4? Is I that's 0, is that smaller than 4? And it is. If it's smaller than 4, then we're going to go ahead and run the loop. And it's going to turn the loop. And then what we're going to do, this is our incrementer. So we're saying let's increment our I in this particular line by 1. Let's add 1 to our I. So as it runs once through this loop, it's going to go ahead and go back to this line, and it's going to now I is going to become 1 because we increment by this line by saying let's increment by 1. Okay, so now that it's 1, we're going to test this again. We're going to say, is it smaller than 4? Yes. So we're going to run it again. Then it's going to become 2. Is it smaller than 4? Yes. It's going to become 3. Is 3 smaller than 4? Yes. So it's going to run one more time. And then finally, we're going to ask, it's going to become 4. We're going to ask, is 4 smaller than 4? 4 is not smaller than 4. So it's not going to run. It's going to get out of the loop. So as a result of that, this is going to run 4 times. So if I did this logger log thing that I was doing before, just to see what happens. So this is just to print something in our logs. And I'm going to just say, hello. If I run this code, Now we go back and check our logs. You see that it repeats that 4 times. So we have hello, 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 4 hellos. And again, we started from 0, and again, usually when you do loops, you start from 0 in programming languages, and when we start talking about arrays and index, you'll probably better understand why, and if you have been programming, you already know why. So again, we start from 0. So the first time is going to be 0, then it's going to be 1, it's going to be 2, it's going to be 3, and then it's going to get out of the loop. So let's actually log that out so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to log that I variable itself. Oops, let's put that parentheses so we can see what it looks like. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and that's our log, right, that we have. Looks good, I guess. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm curious if there's a way to actually empty the log without programming here. It doesn't seem like there is. If somebody knows a way to just clear the log with a button, let me know. I'm curious about it. But for right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to use log clear. And what that's going to do is going to clear the log, so we don't have, see, right now we already have existing stuff here. So I want to just make sure we start from an empty list. So I'm going to clear the log first programmatically here and then move on to the loop. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to go back to the logs, and you can see the first one is hello, and then 0 0, and then hello 1, hello 2, hello 3. So that's our I variable. The first one it's a 0, and then it increments by 1, 2, 3, and then when it gets to 4, it asks, is 4 smaller than 4? No, it's not smaller than 4. So it doesn't do it anymore. So as a result, we get 4 times. The reason we get 4 times, because we start from 0, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. So we ran 4 times as a result. So that's our for loop. Now, a lot of times what people do, they use that variable in their advantage in their actual scripts. And what I mean by that is that, let's try to do this. Let's say what I want to do, I'm going to change this to 1. What I want to do, I want to take what's here, which is number 1, and add 5 to it, right? And then I want to go to this cell and add 5 to this. And then I want to go to this cell and add 5 to that one. And then I'm going to go to this cell and add 5 to that, and so on. So I want to increment every single cell by 5 that I'm going through. So what I have to do, I have to start looping through this 4 times, right? To do this. So I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4. So I need to do 4 actions. So I'm going to try to use exactly the same loop, although it's probably not a wise idea. There's probably a better way to handle this, but it will do for this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and bring some of these lines in. So for example, what we did, we have a variable, right? And then what we're doing, we're basically incrementing that variable by 5, and then we write that to this thing. This is something that we did before, if you remember. Now, if I run this, what's going to happen? So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And what happens is that, see, this one became 21. And the reason that this became 21 is because we repeated the same thing 5 times. So initially it was 1, right? We added 5, it became 6. Then we added 5, it became 11. Then we add another 5, it's 16. And then another 5, it's 21. Because we're still in the same cell every single time. We're just repeating the same thing 4 times. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to add 5 to this, then 5 to this, then 5 to this, then 5 to this. And the way I can achieve that is by, instead of using a hard-coded value for my rows in my getRange method, I could simply just use a variable instead. So if I use, I want to use the variable I because variable I increments, right? So if I did I, that's going to be 0. But where was I starting? I was starting at 8, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say I plus 8 in this particular case. So I plus 8 will be 8 because I is going to be 0 in the beginning. And again, I'm going to replace this 8 with I plus 8 as well. So in this case, what I'm going to say is that let's take this I plus 8, wherever which is going to be 8 initially on the first one, and it's going to run and it's going to replace the first one with a 6 because we're going to add 5 to it. But on the second run, I is going to become 1. So then this 8 is going to become 9 because 1 plus 8 is going to become 9, which will be the next row down. And then so on for the next one, and so on. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's go back, take a look. See, now everything became incremented by 5 because, well, for an obvious reason, right? We went I plus, we did 4 times, we looped through this, and then we did this. Now another way of achieving the same thing, instead of doing I plus 8, I could have started my loop from the 8th I, and instead of saying I plus 8, I could just say I in this particular case, and then I'll also have to replace when is it gonna stop. So when do I want it to stop? I want it to stop, so it's gonna be 8, 9, 10, and 11, right? I want it to have from 8 through 11. So for that reason, I'm going to do 12. Because if you remember, if I did 4, it went 0 to 3, right? If I do 12, it's going to be 11. So it's going to be 8, 9, 10, and 11. And the 12 is not going to be included because I'm saying smaller than 12. All right, fair enough. So now I'm going to go ahead and run this. And now because we have different numbers, 6, 7, 8, 9, we should increment everything by 5. So it should become 11, 12. Well, you get the idea. So I'm going to save it, run. And let's take a look. So 11, 12, 13, 14, we incremented everything by 5. So that's an example of a simple for loop that we have, and how you can use the variable in the loop to actually change the rows in your cells and loop through different rows and kind of look at different arguments in your rows and do something based on that. So that's hopefully that makes sense. So another thing is that right now what I'm doing, I'm checking something, the value in this particular cell, and then I'm incrementing it by 5, right? And I'm putting it in the same cell. Now what if I wanted to take whatever's in here, which is 11, add 5, which is going to make it 16, but put it over here, right next to it. I don't want to put it in the same cell. I want to put right next to it, which is the second column. So what I would do, instead of writing the cell to the first column, I would simply write it to the second column. So same row, which is the same row I that we're going to have, just the next column over, which is the second column. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, run this, so you can see what's going on there. So you can see 11, 16, 12, 17, and so on. Now if I run this again, it shouldn't really change because we're still checking in the first column and writing to the column to the next. So we're still adding 5. So we don't really see any difference as we're doing this. That's our little loop. Hopefully that makes sense. And we'll end this video on that.